कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भुः मा ते सङ्गोत्स्वकर्मणि.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.
Namaste to one and all. The session today in the afternoon, right now as we look at the panel, it is about Gita to be implemented in the professional life, for example. Of course, somebody said if Gita were to be for a later time reflective type of a session, it could have been told to Pandavas when they were in the Ajnatavas of 1 year, or when they were actually away in the forest for 12 years, it could have been told. But the reason why the Gita got told on the eve of the war between the two parties standing in between is because it is eminently practical, and it is only about through implementation that one can recognize the divine nature of ourselves. So it is not about how can we put Gita in a practical sense. If you are not putting it in a practical sense and looking it just as a book to be revered, then you are not doing justice to Gita in the first place. That is the premise with which we need to start. Second, as we look at the panel itself, we are going to look at different ways in which Gita can be implemented. One is, how do we gain the samyak drusti, to have a larger perspective? In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna ji uses the word gnanam. Gnanam is generally translated as knowledge, but actually if you look at it, original roots of it, it is gaining a perspective. It is gaining a bigger picture, being able to see the whole thing. Especially if you were to look at it from a perspective of samyak gnanam, or if you were to look at it from what you might call the idea of seeing everything first, seeing the big picture, that is the first step. So how do we use Gita to look at the world as a whole, look at the situation as a whole, and can we look at the big picture first and then make the decisions? Second, karma. How do we take action? Like Deshpande ji just mentioned about, how do we become a karma yogi? There are ways of doing karma in a sattvic way, which is the balanced perspective. Samatvam yoga uchyate, or when you look at the sthitaprajna lakshanas, which Deshpande mentioned, or we can be rajasic, like an entrepreneur, when they are aggressive and saying, this is what I need, or if I'm an executive saying, my promotion is due, my manager is not taking responsibility, that is an aggressive karma. Or tamasic karma means it doesn't matter, they don't have money yet, company is running out of money, if I go ask for a raise, maybe I lose my job. That's a tamasic karma. So there are ways of doing it in a practical way. Third is the karta. This is where Gita differentiates itself from many of the things. As many of the panelists will talk about, they will talk about how the kartrutva bhav and bhoktrutva bhav, I am the one who is doing it, I am the one who is enjoying it. This role clarity is the one that we need to get in the business. How do we get it in such a way that we can actually gain value for ourselves while serving a noble purpose? That is the third one which we need to look at. And fourth, in the buddhi, making the decisions. How do we make right decisions, either in work or at home or at a university or in a biotechnology company, or when a person is being a physician? How do we make these decisions? That is another area where we have a panelist who will be able to talk about how does buddhi and Gita can be useful when somebody is in a physician context. Then comes dhruti and sukham. Dhruti means fortitude. Being in Silicon Valley, we know unless we have right kind of dhruti, that means the certain perseverance. Of course, perseverance can be two kinds. One is, I'm going to stay with it. I know everybody says there is nothing in it. This company is not going anywhere. I'm losing money. I'm going to stay with it. Or I'm going to stay with it because there is a value, there is a larger purpose that I serve and the customers are being happy. Because of that, I'm going to stay with it. So the idea of Rajasika Dhruti, Tamasika Dhruti, and also Satvika Dhruti, the idea of how do you persist as a professor. We have a person who is from a Jewish background who has actually taken on Bhagavad Gita and sees there is a balance that can be brought in when to let go, when to hold on. If you are playing a card game, you know this dilemma quite well. But life is itself a card game according to Bhagavad Gita. And finally, the sukham. Sukham can be described as something that you enjoy. But the key of sukham actually comes when you understand what is the motivation behind that makes you feel comfortable. That is what I call enlightened self-interest. Being in the Silicon Valley, where we are, why we are conducting this in the middle is about enlightened self-interest. While we are spreading the message of Gita, how to apply it to various people, we are also going to be listening to ourselves and learning in such a way. Giving is the most powerful way to get what you want. If you keep focusing on what is it that I want, then you are the only one who is going for it and everybody else is preventing you from you getting what you want. But when you take this perspective of Sattvika Sukham, where I give to everybody, then everybody else will help you to get what you want. That is the kind of a trick that we'll talk about. And as a matter of fact, some of the panelists, I think every one of them is well equipped to be able to address that. So we have a perspective from a Sikh perspective, how that actually makes a difference, what it means. We have a Jewish perspective, we have a physician's perspective, we have a professor's perspective, we have a consultant's perspective, we have an author's perspective. That is what we are going to look at. How do you take and apply the Gita, which is time eternal, in day-to-day scenario? So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to ask each person to actually say a little bit about themselves, take about 5 minutes to introduce how Gita has impacted them and how they got to Gita. If we can do that, some of it, and then we may have a few questions from there. So let us start with the Gita, the Sikh perspective which we have. Please, if we can have you start with, how did you get into Gita? How does that impact? And what does it mean to you? Thank you. Yeah.
Honorable Chairperson Satya Kalra ji, Pujya Swami Gyananand ji, my dear friend and guide, Pujya Swami Chedanand Saraswati ji, my sister in divine Sadhvi Saraswati ji, Desh Pandey ji. I'm sorry I don't know the names of all the guests seated on the dais, but distinguished guests and divine souls. It is truly a pleasure to be here with you today and understand the message of Gita. Like Pujya Swamiji Gyananji said in his morning address, Gita is a message of universal education, intellect, and it's for the mankind. Religions may come and go, but truth will always remain. Gita encompasses all the faculties that are needed in today's social, corporate, and all kinds of dilemmas that we face. Arjuna faced a dilemma in his life, whether to fight or not to fight. And Lord Krishna was there as his spiritual guide, as his charioteer, advising him on the various aspects of whether he should fight or not. Among the 5 reasons given to him were soul, that the soul, according to Krishna, the soul is the owner of the body. Karma, Lord Krishna explained to him that you do not worry about the karma. I will take upon your karma. Kartavya, duty, that it is your duty to go and fight. Arjuna, as we all know, was one of the most accomplished fighter at his time. Then there was another message Lord Krishna gave him: inaction is impossible. You have to act. And it's really fascinating that the message of Bhagavad Gita was given on a battlefield rather than inside a temple, inside a home, inside any other environment. 18 days of the epic Mahabharata, 700 verses Lord Krishna encompasses in the Bhagavad Gita. There's only one of Dhritarashtra, the king, father of Duryodhana. There's 41 messages of Sanjaya, who was relaying everything on the battlefield to the king. There were 84 messages of Arjuna and 574 messages of Lord Krishna. This morning, Guru Ma had said that these are 700 pills or vitamins. Even if we adopt one of it, our life will be much better. Now, coming to the theme of how Gita is relevant in today's modern times. Now, Gita, as we know, was written over 5,000 years ago, 5,151 years ago. But its message is as relevant today as it was over 5,000 years ago. Today, as we go along, we look at various dilemmas that each one of us faces. We live in the US, we have corporate social responsibility, and you will be glad to know that many US corporations are adopting Gita as their message, teaching their executives, teaching their shareholders because of the stress involved. There's a lot of stress to generate profits in corporations. So Gita's message is very universal and relevant. How Gita compares to my religion, I practice Sikhism. Although I practice Sikhism, I have extreme respect and reverence for all the holy texts. Guru Nanak, our founder of our religion, said that each and every holy text is capable of enlightening its followers on the divine path. And there is no one holy text superior or better than the other. Now, Gita's message and Sikhism's message are truly quite intertwined. We talk about in the Gita that everything comes from inside. Man, you have to take care of your heart. Outside padarats or the material things will vanish. Giving an example of what sukh is. Bhagavati ji was mentioning about sukh. Sukh is what? It's limited. If a person is hungry or thirsty, you give him water, you give him food, his sukh is accomplished. But that does not give him anand, bliss, happiness from the inside. So we need to look inside. Life starts from inside. When an eggshell is broken from the inside, life starts. When the eggshell is broken from the outside, life ends. So everything is within us. Happiness is in our heart. In the Guru Granth Sahib, also it says that man tu jot saroop hai, apna mool pehchan. Understand your own mind, understand your own inner self. Swami Chidanandji, Puja Swami Chidanandji always mentions about inner connection. Yes, we have internet today. In today's day and age, we have all the technology that we don't even need, but we have. But unless we connect with our inner self, not just internet, we are not going to be happy, we are not going to attain peace. All the material things in this life, as we have seen, comes with a user manual. You buy a bicycle, you buy a radio, you buy a cell phone, you buy a car, it all comes, you buy a refrigerator, it has a user manual. Do you think God has made us one of the most complicated gadgets that God himself made without a user manual? No. We also have a user manual. We need to understand our own software. There is a great amount of untapped software within us. As Albert Einstein said, human beings only use 4 to 5% of our brain. Just imagine if it was the other way around, if we used 95% and not use 5%. So, folks, friends, we have to look inside. We have to go inside our mind and we have to connect with our inner self. Only then peace and happiness will be attained. Just a brief introduction of myself. My name is Bhai Sahab Satpal Singh Khalsa. I live in New Mexico and I'm with the organization of Yogi Bhajan, who started Sikh Dharma and also brought Kundalini Yoga to the Western Hemisphere. And I'm a practitioner of Kundalini Yoga as well. And not taking too much time, I would thank all of you. And if there are, I'm told there might be question and answers. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can from my mind. Thank you so much.
Dr. Goldberg-ji, please. You want to speak right here?
Yeah, I can do that.
You can do that.
Is this? Yeah, I can do this. This? Whichever you like. Okay. Hello. Namaste. I guess we're introducing ourselves now. I'm Phil Goldberg. I'm here because I'm the author of a book some of you know called American Veda, which describes the 200 years or so that teachings from India have come to America and their impact on our country. And as the author of that book, I feel compelled to let all of you know that there have been millions upon millions of Americans who are not of Indian origin, who are not Hindu, whose lives have been radically transformed by the Gita and by the teachings that are embodied in the Gita. And unlike the three of us on stage today, they're not all Jews. Most of them are not. And I was exposed to the Gita secondhand back in the 1960s when I was a student, and I was reading some of the great minds of Western history. And they wrote with such love and respect and reverence for the Gita, people like Thoreau and Emerson and modern thinkers like Alan Watts and Joseph Campbell, that I said, I have to get a copy of that thing, whatever it is. And I actually had trouble finding one at that time. It's obviously no longer the case. And it radically changed my life for the better immediately. And within a few years, I had read several translations and I had read the Upanishads. And I began studying I took up meditation practice and began studying with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi back in the early 70s. And it was during those years that I read the Gita over and over again. And a few verses just stood out so strongly, like the clanging of bells, that they've been the organizing principles of my life ever since. I mean, every verse in the Gita is something to be studied for a lifetime, and there's millions of lessons to be learned in each. But these, for me, stood out and became governing principles. And one was chapter 2, verse 48. And it's the only verse I know in the Sanskrit, and I'm going to mangle the pronunciation, I'm sure, but it's Yogastha Kuru Karmani. Established in yoga, perform action. It didn't say, oh, well, if you want moksha, you have to renounce the world and go live in a cave, because I didn't want to do that. And it didn't say, you know, when your kids are grown and you retire from the world, then you could be a yogi. It said, no, be a yogi now. That's the first thing. First, be a yogi. Achieve that state of consciousness, dive deeply into the self, and attain at least glimpses of that state of consciousness that is the definition of yoga, that union, and then perform action. I couldn't think of anything more practical or more rational as a young man, that you would first get in touch with the deepest and purest and most profound parts of the self, and then do what you have to do in the world. Whether you're a warrior or an author like me who plays around with words instead of bows and arrows. And then the question arises, well, what kind of yoga and what kind of action? And there the Gita gives us choices. And I was a very anti-religious young man. I didn't like being told what to do. And I did not like being told I have to be something I really wasn't inside. So I had rejected all those kinds of religious teachings and a lot of other things. But here was this profound teaching that gave me choices. And then it gave me the concept of Dharma. And the other verse that stood out and I memorized early on and still governs my life is 335. Because one can perform it, one's own dharma, even if it's lesser in merit, is better than the dharma of another. Better is death in one's own dharma. The dharma of another brings danger. Really? Wow. Here was a message that said you can be true to yourself. It not only gave you permission to be true to yourself, it said you must be true to yourself. You must find your dharma. And by being true to yourself, it wasn't just the superficial thing of, do your thing like hippies used to say. It was the highest calling of a human being can attain, and the authenticity of one's personal dharma. And those two things, one told me the value of sadhana. And in all these 40 some odd years, I think I've missed one day of sadhana, or maybe 5. And being true to one's dharma. Those two principles have been the governing factors of my life. And I'll yield at this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I have Dr. Mihir Meghani, please?
Namaste, Om Namah Shivaya, Jain Jinendra, Sat Shri Akal, and Jai Shri Krishna. I'm really honored to be on this panel with very prominent dignitaries and luminaries of Hinduism in our community. I know that we're running over, so I'm going to try to stay on time. Maybe you can get home a few minutes earlier for dinner, because you have some great speakers coming afterwards. I want to tell you my background and where the Bhagavad Gita came into my life. I was born and raised in the United States, in the East Coast. I was very privileged at a young age to have the opportunity to become a Swayam Sevak. I went to Hindu Swayam Sevak Sangh and Vishwa Hindu Parishad youth camps, Chinmaya Mission, Swami Narayan. And from that, I was exposed to the teachings of Swami Vivekananda and the Bhagavad Gita. And when I was about 9 years old, after I read the Gita and read some of the books by Swami Vivekananda and others, I just realized that I really wanted to do seva and service. And that was from an activist standpoint. I went to college and I became a physician, and that was the other big area where the Bhagavad Gita impacted me. And where it impacts me as an emergency physician, I work for Kaiser Permanente in Fremont and San Leandro, is that we're faced all the time with decisions about life and death. Some of you, many of you come to the emergency room. I hope not, but if you do, you often come not being able to tell us what's happening, and we have to make decisions within minutes and deal with family members and tests and put it all together and try to save lives. And I think all of you know one of the messages of the Gita, work for work itself and not for the result. So we put in, me and other physicians, our best effort and leave the results, as Swami Chidananji always says, leave it to God. That takes the burden off of us, but we do the best we can. But the Gita's main message to me in my life was that I wanted to do social service. And I was able to find a group of like-minded people, some of your children, who got together and formed the group called the Hindu American Foundation. And I don't want to talk about what our group does, but what I found is that we can live out our own karma, the karma yoga that the Bhagavad Gita talks about, not just by necessarily serving the poor or cleaning the streets, but by serving a broader cause through the organization. And when we work in a group, many of you who look at organizations say that you think there are people on the stage and people with a microphone. But I can tell you that what we've done in our organization is we've said that we're going to make this group a forum to practice karma yoga. And what that means is within our group, we're not going to fight for the podium, we're not going to fight for the platform. We're going to work as true sevaks. And with 13 years in our organization, with people who are born and raised in this country, people who've read the Gita, people who are your children, we've never had a fight or within the organization for power or podium. And I think that's a testament to many of you as parents, to the Swamijis and others who've guided us. But we really try to live our life that way. And the final thing I'll say is that when I went to a youth camp organized by Vishwa Hindu Parishad in the East Coast, there are two verses of the Gita that at that time I was forced to memorize, but really became a big part of my life. Dhyayato vishaya pusaha sangasteshu pajayate samjayate kamaha kamat krodhod vijayate krodhat bhavati sammohat smriti vibhramaha smriti brahmashat buddhinasho buddhinashat pranashyati. And what that reminds me is that while I've had all this success in life, my parents came from India in 1969. They were educated here. They weren't doctors, lawyers, or entrepreneurs. And of course, they're not swamis and sadhus in the sense you look at them. But they raised two sons, me and my brother. I've gotten married to a wife who's a jewelry designer. I'm an emergency doctor. I've been associated with many people. I have an opportunity to serve on this panel. But I always remember that we all have a Ravan, we all have Duryodhan in ourselves. And we have to remind ourselves that we don't want to become them. Those two verses from chapter 2, verses 62 and 63, always remind us we cannot become attached to how big we've become. We should not become attached to how much we think we can do. Because for every one of us, there are thousands of people who don't have the stage, who don't have a title, who are doing it. I think the Bhagavad Gita serves as a check on ourselves for our own egos, and it guides us to what we can become. Because I think the ultimate goal for all of us is not just to realize God, not just to reach God, but to take our physical body to the highest plane and realize moksha. Thank you and namaste.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meghani. Can I have Mr. Phil Goldberg, please? You want to take this? You want to take this?
Gita sugita kartavya kimanyai shastra sangrahe ya swayam padmanabhasya mukapanmad vinisritaha sarva shastramayi gita sarva deva mayo harihi sarva tirtha mayi ganga sarva dharma mayi daya. This is a part of the Prashasti of the Gita saying, you only need to read the Gita. What's the use of all these other Shastras? Since this is the one that came directly out of the lotus mouth of the lotus-naveled Lord. the Gita consists of all Shastras. Hari consists of all the deities. Ganga, Mother Ganga, consists of all the tirthas, the holy tirthas. And Daya, compassion, is consisting of all dharmas. So, Paramapujaniyaha Swami Padaha, Dr. Kaipa Sahib, Dr. Maharaj Sahib, and Satya Kalra. My name is Robert Goldman. I'm the other Jewish panelist here, apparently, today. So I want to talk for a few minutes about the role the Gita had in my life, because my whole life was essentially changed by my, more or less accidental, if you believe in accidents, exposure to the Gita when I was young. I'm a professor of Sanskrit at the University of California at Berkeley, so my entire life is actually working on Gita, Gita commentaries, Ramayana, Mahabharata, all the great classical, philosophical, and literary treasures of the Sanskrit tradition. But when I was a young man in high school, filled with all the angst and anxieties and troubles of teenagers from antiquity to the present, and I was having some difficult time with teachers and parents and girlfriends, I happened to pick up a little paperback book someone had left around. It turned out to be the translation of the Bhagavad Gita by Christopher Isherwood and Swami Prabhavananda. And I was just astonished by it. I had never read anything quite like that, because it seemed to teach a way to live in the world without being subject to the emotional storms of life. In other words, not succumbing to Vishada, as Arjuna nearly succumbs to, but for the counsel of Lord Krishna. And that put that seed in my mind, that this was a text unlike others I had seen, because it not only is a spiritual text, teaching you how to attain the highest spiritual goals, but at the same time is teaching you how to live in the world with all the problems of the world without being touched by it, if you do it in a certain way, which is preached by Lord Krishna in the form of karma yoga. Because, as you see, as Adi Shankaracharya, the great philosopher, in his magisterial commentary to the Bhagavad Gita, notes that at the beginning of the world, the Holy Lord Narayana created dharma in two flavors, if you like. Dvivido hi vedokto dharma. The dharma of the Vedas comes in two fashions. The nivritti dharma and the pravritti dharma. That is dharma of withdrawal from the world and focusing only on your inner life and spirit, which is a wonderful thing, and many great sages have attained that. And then there's pravritti yoga. That is staying in the world, doing your job, no matter what it is, because it is your duty. And Arjuna, when confronted with an unpleasant duty, fighting with his own family, says, I don't want to do this. I can't do this. I'm going to take to nivritti yoga. I'll be an ascetic, a mendicant. I'll go off into the forest. Krishna says, no, there is a way of being in the world without being touched by the world in a negative way. And this is the karma yoga, which consists of two things. That is nishkama karma. That is action in the world without desire for anything, right? And swadharma, doing what you are born to do, so to speak. So he rejects for Arjuna, who's a man of the world, a soldier, a prince, this path of nivritti yoga, right? Karmaya vidikaraste ma paleshu kadachana. Your duty is to do your job. Just don't obsess about the outcomes. Don't worry about the outcomes, right? Ma palaheturbu. Don't get worried about the outcomes all the time, but never, and this is the important part, but never get addicted to inaction. And that leads to the other very important, unique contribution of the Gita among all ancient texts, which is this concept of loka sangraha, that your job here is to build a better world. You can talk about Swargaloka, you can talk about salvation, but build this world first. Remember, ahimsa paramo dharmaha. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Sir, please.
I'm Krishna Kalra. I'll first tell you about what I like, what verses that have helped me shape my life, and then I'll share with you what I do and how I function in my professional life. My most favorite verse is 2nd chapter, 45th verse. It's my belief and my interpretation of this verse that Sar of Gita is in just one verse, and Lord is explaining how to practice what is said in this verse. Basically, and I'm using the 108 mantras, 3 cards from that. So this 45th verse of 2nd chapter, there are 4 main concepts, and I wouldn't want to recite Sanskrit because not good, as well as in the interest of time, I will focus on the, so there are 3 main concepts in here, maybe 4. One is transcend. Transcend the 3 gunas. Tamas, Rajas, and Sat. So transcend. Now, it took me many years to really fully understand this, and I don't believe I fully still understand, but whatever I understand, I'll share. And it's just 2 days ago, I asked Gyananandji about this verse. So one is transcend. That means to me, you live in this material world, but don't be attached to it. So this is my car, or this is my home. I have privilege of owning this home, or I have right to own this home. Those 2 things make a big difference. If I lose it, I'll be stressed if I feel it is my right to have that home. And on the other hand, if I see it's my privilege to live in this house, or privilege to manage this company, or privilege to be friends with so many people, and if I lose, I'm less stressed. That's the meaning of this transcend. Second concept in this verse is nirdvando, be without the duality. And that's also a very difficult concept, especially in the Western world. The pain and pleasure is the driver. But we hear the idea, as I understand or I interpret, there's a pain and pleasure, but don't be attached to either the pain or the pleasure. Momentarily feel it, momentarily absorb it, and transcend, and look at the problem, what has caused the pain or the pleasure, and move on. Third concept is here, free yourself from also the loss and gain. And the last concept, which is the most important, be a possess of self. So these principles have helped my life. Karmanevadhika becomes much easier to practice once I understood that I have to transcend the material world while living in it, enjoying it, but not to be attached. And then the last verse here is Sarvasya Chaham. Essentially, here Krishna says, I do it, you're only the means. You're only the puppet. I do it. And the way I interpret this, there's a God within us. Sometimes it's in small form, or sometimes it's manifest, depends on our nature. So these 3 verses have helped me. I'm a scientist in the beginning, did a PhD in physical chemistry. So my initial work was in physical sciences. Later on, it turned into cancer. And I look at the problem that others have said it's impossible to solve. That's the problem that drives me. And then my focus is how this problem, if I solve, will help the patient. How his cancer can be diagnosed better, more accurately, and can be given correct treatment. And more recently, I have taken up a challenge of the cancers. That about 30% of the cancer not diagnosed correctly. As a result, those people don't have a chance to live. And that's probably one of the most challenging problems so far that I have taken, but I believe with God's grace and with my guide of these 3 verses, not focusing on the results, not focusing on the money or monetary reward, but focusing on the ultimate reward. Can I find a way that these people who die in 6 months or 9 months after cancer is diagnosed, can I help, working with my team, find a way to have them live 5 to 10 years or more? Thank you.
What we will do is, I have some questions for each panelist. Just 2 minutes they have to answer, and then we'll have a few minutes to take your question. Because we just completed with Krishna ji, so maybe I'll go back to Bhai Saheb Satpal Sankal sir. Sir, you talked about being a perfect student of Sikh to absorb the teachings of your Guru and uplift yourself from sorrows. What role did Gita play compared to what role Guru Granth Sahib or your own teachings play? Is there any significant difference, or did you find any way in which you can use Gita to guide yourself to be a better Sikh?
It's a good question. Gita basically, as we learned this morning, talks about the 5 vices: Kam, Krodh, Moh, Lobh, Ankar, anger, greed, attachment, ego. Now, Sikhism also talks about these 5 vices. And to overcome these 5 vices, ego is one of the biggest vices that Sikhism talks about, to let go of your ego. And I think it's a similar message in Gita also. When Lord Krishna went to Duryodhana and to plead with him that not to fight and to give them, the Pandavas, the 5, at first he said give them the 5 lots. Then he said if you cannot give them the land that belongs to them, give them at least 1 each for all the 5 brothers. And Duryodhana refused. What is that? Ego. He said, I will not even give them the tip of a needle, and you're talking about 5 parcels of land. Now, ego is how I feel the Mahabharata started. Draupadi was a very accomplished artist, chitrkar, poetess, and there was a big function in the new Raj Mahal. Duryodhana was invited. Now, Draupadi, as you might have heard this story, decorated the swimming pool and it looked like a garden. Duryodhana was invited and was late, and instead of going through the main hall, he went through the pool thinking that it is a garden, but he didn't realize it was pool. When he jumped into it, the whole arrangement of Draupadi got spoiled. So Draupadi said, Akhir mein ande ka aulad andhi hai. That one word, I think, started Mahabharata. So I learned a lot from Bhagavad Gita to give up your ego, to give up your anger, to give up your greediness. So it's a similar message. And also one last thing I'd like to say, that similar messages in Guru Granth Sahib also. Gita is telling us to look inward and learn from the sublime message of Gita. Ustad joke, he said, ilm ke jahul se behtar hai jahul ka ilm. Gyan ki murkhta se behtar hai murkhta ka gyan. Instead of knowing the knowledge, it's better to know what foolishness is. So I find a lot of similarities between the two.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir. So let me come back to Mr. Goldberg. Your article in Huffington Post, the Gita and Me, has been very well received, and it's a very insightful article. And you also talked about yogastha kuru karmani, the whole idea of being able to do things from a yoga state of mind, whatever you do. Can you tell us, how can we apply it in daily life? How do you apply it in your daily life, that particular principle you elaborated?
Well, as I suggested before, it was verses like that that convinced me of the importance of sadhana, of regular practice. That's how one cultivates the state of being that yoga is. These days, people talk about yoga as something you do. They're going to do yoga today, meaning they do some asanas. But the definition of yoga in the Gita and in the Yoga Sutras is first and foremost a state of consciousness. It's the very definition is unity of consciousness. And how does one achieve that? You can't fake that, but you can cultivate it. And the way I understand to cultivate it is through regular sadhana. So I've been meditating, supplemented by some asanas and pranayama and some devotional practices as suits me and my time, but every day for the 47 years now. And there's other verses in the Gita that sort of serve as touchstones for me that are both instructive and descriptive. So when it talks about the yogi having a mind that is like a lamp in a windless place, or when it talks about having equanimity in loss and gain, in victory and defeat, in pain and pleasure, to the extent I don't have those, I realize there's something off in my sadhana, there's something off in the way I'm eating or behaving in the world. So that calls for adjustments in those things.
Thank you very much. Dr. Meghani, you talked about how even though you are born here, you have been very influenced by Bhagavad Gita, and as an emergency physician and as one of the founders of the Hindu American Foundation, you talk about how this has been guiding, and you even brought in the whole idea of in the Sita Prajna and the second chapter, you talk about Sangaste Upajayate, Kama, Krodho Vijayate, of the whole idea of how Kama, Krodha, and all of them decay. How do you apply it? When you are being an emergency physician, when patients come to you, how does this guide you when you are in conflict, when you are struggling? How does this actually affect you?
Yeah, unfortunately, in the emergency room, we don't have a lot of time to think about things, to make really quick decisions. So some people who may not have this sort of teaching in their mind get very, very troubled because they're trying to make the perfect decision and are looking to see what outcome there is. And I think many people here, you may have dealt with this in terms of your own relatives or parents. What do you do? And I'm actually a very hyper person in life, but as a physician, I'm actually quite calm because I have a few seconds to make a decision that's going to affect the person and many hundreds of people around them. And people have asked me this, nurses have said, Dr. Meghani, you're always very hyper, but whenever someone is really sick, you're very calm. And I say, well, I have to be. I have to have a balanced mind in thinking about something, and I have to do what's best, and I don't have time to try to do two things within 5 seconds. And whatever outcome happens is what we have to live with. And almost always, I think we do the right thing when we have that kind of balance or peace of mind. And I'm able to get through the day knowing that I'm prepared for whatever result might happen, knowing that whatever I've done has been in the best interest of the person or the patient in front of me. And I think if we all apply that for everything we do in our life, whether it's our relationships, our spouse, our family, our work, not only do I think we're living out the Gita, but I think that we reduce our own stress and we become a happier person.
Thank you. Professor Goldman, you have been teaching Sanskritam and you have been talking about Mahabharata, you have been specifically talking about Bhagavad Gita, and you impacted the hundreds and thousands of students in University of California, of Berkeley, and beyond. When you teach Bhagavad Gita to people who come from different religions, how do you take the essence of the spirit of Gita? How do you make it secular but still retain the magical essence, the spirituality in Gita in such a way that people can actually apply it? What do you do and what do you tell them?
Well, it's a very interesting task that is set before one, because as Dr. Kaipa says, you're coming with students coming from all kinds of backgrounds. Most of my students come from the Indo-American community, but have often very little understanding or background in the Gita. Some come from Pakistani families, from Chinese families, from all over. So we try to put before them, what is the essential issue in the Gita? What is it doing? And we also look at the work in a historical perspective. One of the things, that Ananda Kumar Swami said, he said the Gita is a compendium of the whole Vedic doctrine to be found in the earlier Vedas, Brahmanas, and Upanishads, and being therefore the basis of all later developments, it can be regarded as the focus of all Indian religion. And that's one of the brilliant things about the Gita, is that it brings in, through these different yogas, a kind of a stepped path. He starts, after scolding Arjuna, he starts with this Jnana Yoga. What is the Jnana Yoga? Is the teaching of the Upanishads. But then how many people can have the intellectual capacity and the sheer leisure time to sit somewhere and ponder on the nature of the Atman? We can't do it in this modern world. Well, there's another way to do it. Then he talks about Karma Yoga, how you can act in the world without being tainted by the world. And then comes the culmination, which is Bhakti Yoga, which is devotion to Lord Krishna, or to God, whichever God you want to choose. If you want to talk about the God in any religion, we talked earlier about how all scriptures finally teach much the same thing. So you try to bring the Gita in as something, as a work of world religious literature, and also as the culmination of Indian religious literature, which is one of the reasons, I think, for its great success, where even an Advaita, a great like Adi Shankaracharya, would write a commentary on it. The Vishishtadvaita, great scholar, Ramanujan, writes a commentary on the Gita. The dualist, Madhva, writes a commentary on the Gita. And almost every important Indian spiritual teacher from that time onward has at least one commentary on the Gita. From Adi Shankaracharya to Gandhi, Aurobindo, you name it. Goldberg, whatever.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr. Kishan Kalra, when you are an entrepreneur and when you are practicing Gita, does it mean when you go into competitive world with your biotechnology, you just say, let it happen. I'm just going to let somebody win because the fruits of action is not in my hands and I don't really care. Is that how you lead your entrepreneurial company? How do you really balance between the spiritual and material elements while practicing Bhagavad Gita?
Well, I have focused on the patient, the ultimate beneficiary of my work. So one of the projects we did in 1988 is called antigen retrieval. It is practiced in almost every lab in the world where the cancer tissue is diagnosed. We were the first one to publish. Most people did not try because it was contrary to the going opinion, or it was counterintuitive against the wisdom. But if we did not solve the problem, the cancer survival rate most likely still will be in the 20 or 30%, as opposed to in some cases 90% now, 5-year survival. So focus is always the patient. And as a result, and I admit that I have at times lost the big picture of monetizing the research. So that's how now as I just said a little earlier, 30% of the cancers today are not diagnosed correctly. As a result, patient has a chance, a luck of doctor prescribing him the right drug or not. I don't have a lot of money. I have not raised a lot of money, but I'm creative, and I surround myself with few very creative people. And I believe that in the last 4 or 5 years of work, hard work, we are on our way to improve that significantly. Whether we will monetize this research in a big way or not, only time will tell.
As I listen, please prepare we have time for a couple of questions. Please give the questions without any context. Question means straight question, not a comment, not an opinion, just a question. As you prepare, there are a couple of things that come to my mind as I listen to this. One great Ahalya boy had gone to a teacher to learn about Bhagavad Gita, and the teacher started, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. She said, stop. I got it. She said, what nonsense are you saying? This is the first line of the first verse of the first chapter, which has got 18 chapters and 700 slokas. Is this your level of interest? She said, no, you just said, Dharma Kshetre Kurukshetre. What does it mean? Kshetre Dharmam Kuru. Whichever field of endeavor you are in, wherever, whatever you are doing, find out what is the right dharma and do it. That is the message of Bhagavad Gita. The Kuru is the action part of it. So that is one thing. So that is one thing that reminded me as I listened to 5 of the wonderful panelists. Second thing, it is important because we are now moving into how do we apply it, and I'm going to, once I take a couple of questions, everybody will have like a couple of minutes to just say what are some recommendations they have for you to do it. As they do it, one story that comes to my mind is, on the 18th day, after the war is won, Arjuna goes home. There are very few people left on both sides. And when Arjuna goes to the home and all these people are waiting to give him arti and invite him home, he is the prima donna who has won, the great commander. Lord Krishna, till then, because as the Sarathi, he was getting down and opening the door for Arjuna, but on this day, he just says, get down by yourself. Arjuna feels upset. Wait a minute. All these times he has treated me so respectfully. Today, instead of when I come in as the victorious commander, he says, just get down and go. So then, of course, Arjuna doesn't say anything. He gets down and goes far enough from the chariot. And Arjuna looks around, makes sure there is nobody nearby, and he jumps out of the chariot. And the Hanuman, who was on the flag, he just takes off like a lightning. That instant, the entire chariot bursts into flames. Arjuna and everybody else is surprised. What happened there? Krishna says, because you are under my protection, all the great astras, the weapons by Bhishma and Drona and all the Brahmastra, none of them could act on you. And now that my role as the chariot driver is over, if I get down before you get down, you will be gone. That is his final message. And still, because of that, I had to let you go before I go. So the idea is, you do what you do under the protection of the divine consciousness, the Krishna consciousness, God consciousness, whatever you want to call. But if you do your actions with that kind of an awareness that I am the nimitta matram bhavasavya sachi, I have to do what I need to do, but something else is happening, then any action you take, there can be a protection. So just keep that in mind. And we had, I think there were a couple of hands up. We had one hand up. So can you speak loud and say what your question is?
So my question is this. Everybody says from my childhood, I heard Bhagwan andar hai. Bhagwan andar, everybody knows. अब तो हम ओल्ड भी हो गए, अभी तक भगवान को खोज रहे हैं. My question is there any way in Gita that we can reach to God who is very close to us? Is it through sadhana or name chanting or Gita Adhyay or Mahatma, whatever? That is the answer I want.
So the question, for in case you didn't understand the Hindi or other part, what is the one way? What is one approach to reach God? How do I practice sadhana? Anybody? You want to speak, please?
This is a very universal question. How to attain, reach God, how to remember God. There are two things. One is dhyan and one is gyan. जब आपका ध्यान किसी ज्ञान की प्राप्ति के लिए चलता है, जब वो ज्ञान प्राप्त हो जाए, ध्यान खत्म हो जाता है. In other words, when you are looking for some knowledge, you want to learn a bike, you want to learn how to drive a car, you have full concentration. You want to learn how to fly a plane, you have full concentration. But once you achieve that knowledge, once you learn how to ride a bike, once you learn how to drive a car, your dhyan is gone. There's no concentration. If you meditate on that God, on that one God, whichever God you want to have faith in and remember, you have to have constant dhyan. You have to have constant remembrance. You cannot just say, okay, I have attained God and that's it. I've read Bhagavad Gita, I've read Bible, I've read Islam. You have to keep your dhyan going. That's one way of making sure that you are in tune with the divine.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Second question. Yeah, if please, come to the microphone, please. There is a microphone.
Namaste.
Yeah.
I just want to know that what is the difference between rigidity and sthita prajna sthiti?
Rigidity and sthita prajna sthiti. Anybody wants to take? And sthita prajna, the balanced state.
If you are a sthita prajna, people call you that you are a rigid person.
I can take that. And you want to take that? Okay. Please take it.
No, because rigidity is, of course, a negative, a pejorative thing. Someone who is unbending, who doesn't acknowledge the arguments of others, and so on and so forth. This is not the teaching of the Gita. The Gita is, sthita prajna is someone who has calmed and focused his or her own intellect. That is, makes it stable, so it's not blown by the winds, it's not driven by desires, and so on and so forth. So you're able to detach from all the pressures of the world and still get on with whether it's your business or your medical practice or so on. This is why Shri Arjuna asks him so pointedly, Sthita prajnasya ka bhasha samadhistasya keshava sthitadihi kim prabhasheta kimasita vrajeta kim. What is that person like? What is the person whose mind is centered? So it's more like centering, not a rigidity.
I'll add a little bit and saying, anything you take it as the truth and the only truth and everything else is a lie, that is the state of rigidity. There is nothing like only one truth, there are many truths. So even in Rigveda we talk about it like there are many different ways. Ekam sat vipraha bahudha vadanti, we say. So the moment you make other people wrong because you got the truth, because you got the path, because you have the right path, then you are rigid no matter how much of a bhakta you are, no matter how much of a practitioner you are. The ability to have that balance in perspective, that ability to have seeing that the God as well as the demon are part of the same consciousness. The Rakshasas as well as the Devas and the Manushyas are all the three states of the consciousness. When I am unwilling to listen to that, then I become the Saddam Hussein, or I become the enemy, or I become the divine. When I have that consciousness of openness and fluidity and flexibility of recognizing you as much as I have got the same consciousness, and that if I can have that balanced perspective, then I'm practicing Gita without getting rigid. Thank you. So. So there are two questions. We'll take these two questions and then we'll move on. Please, come to that place, please. Yeah, yes, she's coming, and then after that you can come. We'll stop after that, and we'll take the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for a nice presentation. Maybe this is my stupid question, but I want to ask, I'm trying to work on a hypothesis to correlate Gita and modern molecular biology. Is there any school of thought in dharma or religion that what modern science proved, DNA study indicated in mice and genes hypothesis was when introduced, they killed mice, introduced bacteria, E. coli or something else, and they found that DNA was still transformed into other form while mice body was killed. So this is what I think exactly what Gita says.
And the question is?
Nainam na chinnanti.
And the question is?
Question is, Atma and DNA are behaving same. Is there any school of thought, any correlation between what scientists saw in the form of DNA, what Krishna already said to Surya Deva that what Atma is nothing, Atma is already what people later saw as DNA, they said Atma.
Thank you.
So what I'm saying, Gita is very...
Let me repeat the question. Thank you. I got the question. Thank you. Let's see what they'll say. All right. Very nice of you. Thank you. I think we need to call her onto panel next time, but for the time being, we'll take the question. All right. So, she is saying that is there a correlation between what the biology and technology is discovering regarding the genes and some of those, and what Bhagavad Gita says in terms of the soul and some of those? Are there any kind of correlation between science and spirituality? Are there some things you are familiar with? And would you like anybody wants to take that question? Yeah.
Actually, everything that happens in our body, it starts with DNA. There's a sequence, and there are 4 bases. And those bases, when they are in a particular order, we have blue eyes or brown eyes or what. Now, whenever there is a mutation is a change in the sequence of DNA, then something haywire goes in, whether it's cancer or heart disease or gray hair or blindness. Now, meditation, a calm, composed persona or state of mind, and regular meditation allows repair enzymes. These are in our body, and they function better, these enzymes, when we are in a meditative state or we are in a calm stage. And they do their work, and they repair those DNA back to their original sequence. And as a result, there is instant cure of cancer, or there's no cancer, or there's no heart disease, or there's less prevalent of disease in a person like that. So if I understand the question, this is the answer.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you and the last. That will be the last. Okay, please.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
My question is addressed to Goldberg. And the question is, straight away I come to that. Recently I've been reviewing the history books on yoga. That is history of yoga. And interestingly, what I found that nobody has written a history book about yoga, how yoga came, whatever, on India. And there are something like 8 or 9 books of history of yoga in America. You are one of them. Now, your book is a great book because you start with Emerson and come down to write Dr. Ornish. Now, my question is, I come to a specific book which was published in 12 if you have read it. If you haven't, you may not answer it. The question is, the title of the book is The Subtle Body. And I'm sure you have read it, okay? Now in that, the last sentence of that book.
Question, please.
This is what I'm saying. This is a question.
Right. Yeah.
The last sentence of the book raises a very important question. And what it says is that the concept of subtle body is a challenge, if I mistake not, to the American in general? How do you accommodate that metaphysical, ontological status of the consciousness of subtle body when you are practicing yoga the way you are practicing in America?
Thank you.
So would you please answer it?
There seem to be several questions in there, but let me just make a general statement. I hope it answers the question. There have been histories of yoga written that focus really on the recent history of Hatha Yoga and do not do justice to the fullness of what yoga really is and what the impact of the transmission of yogic teachings have been in America over the course of at least 200 years. So, because the term yoga has become so physicalized and sort of co-opted by asana practice, that's one thing. The good news in that world is that there's much more awareness of the depth of yoga, the profundity of yoga, the spirituality of yoga than most people realize if they just look at the images in magazines or popular books that are written. I know a lot of yoga teachers, and I go to those conferences sometimes. There's a deep concern that the yoga that is taught has been trivialized and the focus on physicality has gone too far. And I feel very hopeful that the depth of the teaching and the true meaning of yoga and the true impact it can have on people's lives is alive and well in America, and it's not being corrupted as much as would have seemed to be on the surface.
So, by the way, because of the paucity of time, we will just take these three questions and end it instead of a final word. So that makes it a little bit adjustment, please.
Yeah, my question is actually, before asking the question, I just want to request you people not to mistake me as an atheist. This is not my question. As I promote Gita a lot of people ask me this question. As I'm not well versed with Gita, I couldn't explain them, I couldn't answer them. So I'm asking you people. If you look at Gita, in the first couple of chapters, Lord Krishna explains Arjuna. He actually urges him to follow dharma, uphold dharma, and practice dharma. And almost everything is revolves around dharma. And at the end, he says, Sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja. So if you look at it, it looks like he asks him to leave everything, leave dharma. If for a neutral observer, it looks like a conflict. First he says, practice dharma, uphold dharma, and at the end he says, leave dharma. So it's not I think it's not a conflict, not for me, but a lot of people do feel that way. So how do you explain that?
Anybody wants to take that? You want to try that?
You know, this gets into a common issue in Indian philosophy about levels of truth. I mean, dharma is the way you act in the world. You know, this is, as I said before, you know, as Adi Shankaracharya teaches, you know, the dharma was made in a twofold way, nivritti dharma, pravritti dharma. This is how you act in the world. But God is above the world, is beyond the world. The world is contained in God. So what he's saying is, you know, in order to attain divinity, in order to attain God, you have to practice. You have to do your sadhana. You have to follow your class duty. This is the swadharma is very much tied to these traditional notions of varnashrama dharma. Because you are a kshatriya, that's why you have to fight. That's what he means. If someone else fights, no good. Kshatriya must fight. So this is the thing. So the highest position, the paramarthika truth, you know, as they say is, you know, dharman tyaja, adharmam tyaja. Give up dharma, give up non-dharma. Dharma dharmao parityajya, when you give up both of them, right? Tyagamapi. parityaja. Give up abandonment itself. Because you enter that world of complete non-duality. Complete non-duality. Where dharma doesn't have a meaning because there's no adharma. Once you have the world of dualities, right? You want to become nirdvandvaha, without duality. But in this world you can't avoid it because for every deva there's an asura. For every dharma there's an adharma. How do you get beyond it? That's, I think, what the Lord is saying.
Thank you very much.
I'll also add one simple way to look at it also, to add to what Dr. Goldman said. One is, in the beginning, as a discipline, do your dharma. Because you have to start with certain set of yama, niyama, asana, pranayama they talk about. You have to have yama, niyamas, certain self-control and self-discipline and sadhana practices. For that, you need to know what is samuhika dharma, samajika dharma, swadharma. There are different ways of defining what role you are in, what is the appropriate dharma. At that time, that is what in the beginning part of it, Krishna says about what you need to do on a day-to-day basis. But when you are in confusion, when you are unable to make a decision about what is my dharma, what is my role, who am I, and I am struggling with the existential crisis of either I need to do this war as a kshatriya or as a as a king who is preserving dharma, when I am confused, at that time, look for something that goes beyond your ego, because at some level your ego has to embrace the dharma. Let go of the ego. That also means let go of the dharma which you are looking at. At that time, sarva dharman parityajya mamekam saranam vraja. At that time you get into a mode of surrender. When you are asking for Saranagati, the teacher, the guru will tell you what is the dharma. At that time there is no dharma for you, because you are surrendering yourself, and at that stage that is appropriate. But if you are not in that surrender stage, then you are using your buddhi, identify what is most appropriate and do that. That's why he didn't say in the beginning, he said it in the end. So it is important to recognize there is a certain context in which each of the teachings have been said. If it is misappropriated or if it is interpreted without proper knowledge, you can take anything and then make a mincemeat out of it and then say that this is what Gita said. That is the major damage that happens most of the time. Thank you very much. With that, I thank all the wonderful panelists, and Satyaji, thank you for giving us the opportunity, and have a good afternoon and rest of the panel.
कर्मण्येवाधिकारस्ते मा फलेषु कदाचन मा कर्मफलहेतुर्भुः मा ते सङ्गोत्स्वकर्मणि.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,